You have been trying to choose between two things that do not require a choice. On one side, the world of ordinary experience, the relationships, the work, the daily rhythms, the specific concrete, entirely real texture of a life you're actually living. On the other side, the sense, however vague, however inconsistent, that this ordinary world is not the deepest level of what is real, that there is something underneath the appearance of fixed, separate, stable things, that the solidity of the self and the world is, at some level, less solid than it looks. Most people manage this tension by choosing. Either the ordinary world is all there is, the person who has decided that the appearance is the reality and that depth talk is merely mystical noise, or the ordinary world is ultimately unreal. The person who has decided that awakening means seeing through the conventional to the ultimate, that the goal is to stop being fooled by the appearance and live from the deeper truth. Nāgārjuna, the 2nd century Indian Buddhist philosopher who founded the Madhyamaka school and is considered by many the most important Buddhist philosopher after the Buddha himself, said both choices are wrong. Not because they are roughly equally wrong and the truth lies somewhere in between, because the framework that produces the choice is itself the error. He called it the doctrine of two truths: conventional truth and ultimate truth, both real, both necessary, neither reducible to the other. And the person who tries to live from only one of them, who either denies the ultimate or abandons the conventional, has made a philosophical mistake with consequences that reach all the way down into how they actually live. There is a specific failure mode of the contemplative or philosophical life that Nāgārjuna diagnosed with extraordinary precision. The person who has had a genuine insight into the nature of emptiness sunyata, the teaching that nothing exists with fixed, independent, inherent existence, sometimes draws from this insight the conclusion that the conventional world no longer matters, that relationships, obligations, and the texture of ordinary life are the domain of the unawakened, and that the genuinely awake person operates from the deeper level where none of this has ultimate reality. The wisdom becomes a form of detachment that is indistinguishable in practice from indifference. Nāgārjuna looked at this and said, "You have misunderstood the teaching. Emptiness does not mean the conventional world is unreal. It means the conventional world is real in the way that conventional things are real, dependently, relationally, as part of an interconnected web of causes and conditions, rather than in the way that naive realism supposes. The table is empty of inherent existence. The table is still a table. You still cannot walk through it. The emptiness of the table does not make it less solid. It explains why it is solid, because its solidity arises from the web of conditions that produced it, and that web is itself dependently real. This is the most technically demanding and most practically important move in the entire Buddhist philosophical tradition, and it is available in a completely non-technical form to anyone who has tried to live from only one level of truth and found that the living does not work. Nāgārjuna was born, probably, in the 2nd century CE in South India. The details of his biography are uncertain and heavily mythologized. He is one of the most legendary figures in the Buddhist tradition, credited with everything from supernatural powers to multiple lifetimes spanning centuries. What is historically reliable is that he wrote a body of philosophical texts. Most importantly, the Madhyamaka, the root verses on the middle way, that constituted the most rigorous philosophical analysis of emptiness ever produced, and that founded the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist philosophy. The Madhyamaka, the middle way school, takes its name from the Buddha's original teaching of the middle way between asceticism and indulgence. Nāgārjuna extended this to the philosophical domain, the middle way between the extreme of eternalism, the view that things exist permanently and independently, and the extreme of nihilism, the view that things do not exist at all. The doctrine of two truths is the precise formulation of this middle position. He wrote, in short, dense verses designed to be memorized and debated. The Karika consists of 449 verses in 27 chapters, covering everything from the nature of causation to the nature of the self to the nature of time. His method is primarily negative. He demonstrates that every attempt to locate inherent existence in any phenomenon leads to contradiction. The purpose of this demonstration is not to establish nihilism, but to clear the ground for the proper understanding of how things do exist, dependently, conventionally, as part of the web of interdependent causation that the Buddha called pratitya samutpada, dependent origination. His influence spread from India throughout the Buddhist world, into Tibet, China, Korea, Japan. The Tibetan Gelugpa school, Zen Buddhism, and numerous other traditions trace their philosophical lineage directly through Nāgārjuna. He is the philosopher through whom the most technically rigorous and the most practically consequential Buddhist teaching was developed. The two truths, the framework and what it actually means. Conventional truth, sabdi satya, is the truth of ordinary experience. The truth of tables and chairs, persons and relationships, causes and effects, right and wrong action. This level of truth is not illusory. It is genuinely true at the level at which it operates. The table is a table. The person is a person. Your actions have consequences. The relationships you sustain or neglect are real, and the sustaining or neglecting makes a real difference. Ultimate truth, paramartha satya, is the truth of emptiness. At the ultimate level, the table has no inherent existence. It exists dependently, arising from causes and conditions, lacking any fixed essence that it possesses from its own side. The person has no inherent self. The self is also dependently arising, a process rather than a fixed entity, empty of the kind of solid, independent existence that the naive sense of self assumes. The critical point, the one that Nāgārjuna makes with great precision and that is the most commonly misunderstood, is that these two truths are not two levels of reality, where one is more real than the other. They are two accurate descriptions of the same reality from two different but complementary perspectives. The table is conventionally a table. This is true. The table is ultimately empty of inherent existence. This is also true. Neither truth cancels the other. Both are necessary for a complete and accurate understanding. And then the move that makes this practically urgent. Without conventional truth, the ultimate cannot be taught. And without the ultimate, nirvana cannot be attained. This is not a logical formula. It is a description of how the two truths function in the actual practice of the awakened life. The ultimate truth, emptiness, liberates from the clinging that conventional realism produces, the clinging to the self as a fixed thing, to the world as independently real, to the outcomes of action as if they depended only on our separate will. But the teaching of emptiness can only be communicated through conventional language, conventional concepts, conventional relationships between teacher and student. Destroy the conventional, and you destroy the vehicle through which the ultimate is transmitted. Nāgārjuna's most famous verse makes this explicit. Without relying on convention, the ultimate cannot be taught. Without understanding the ultimate, nirvana cannot be attained. The two truths are not enemies. They are the warp and weft of the same fabric. Now the bridge. Because Nāgārjuna was a 2nd century Indian Buddhist philosopher writing in Sanskrit for a specifically Buddhist philosophical audience. And most people watching this video are not. But here is what translates directly. The person who has grasped something of the ultimate, who has had the insight that the separate, fixed self they have been protecting is not as separate or as fixed as it felt, sometimes uses this insight to disengage from the conventional. The relationships, the obligations, the ordinary texture of life start to feel like attachment to be released rather than reality to be engaged. The wisdom becomes a kind of elevation above the mess of the actual life. Nāgārjuna is precise about this failure. It is the nihilist extreme, the misuse of the teaching of emptiness. The self is empty of inherent existence, yes. The self is still the conventional locus of action, relationship, and moral responsibility. The person who uses emptiness to escape the conventional has not understood emptiness. They have used it as a new kind of clinging, clinging to the ultimate as a refuge from the demands of the conventional. And the opposite failure is equally real. The person who is so thoroughly embedded in the conventional that the ultimate is simply unavailable, who has organized their entire life around the solid, separate, independent self that the ultimate truth reveals to be empty, is also missing something necessary. The freedom that comes from understanding that the self is not the fixed, solid, threatened entity it feels like. The release from the constant project of defending and advancing a self that, at the ultimate level, is not as solid as the defending and advancing assumes. Both truths, neither alone is sufficient. Both together constitute the complete understanding that the philosophical and contemplative life is trying to reach. Here is what Nāgārjuna asks of you, practically, today. First, notice where you are living from only one truth. Are you so absorbed in the conventional, in the ordinary reality of the self's projects and protections and relationships, that the ultimate has no room in your daily experience? Or are you using the ultimate, the insight into emptiness, the sense that things are less solid than they appear, to distance yourself from the genuine demands of the conventional? Both are real forms of imbalance. Both produce a kind of suffering that the correct understanding dissolves. Name which error is more present for you right now, not as self-judgment, as orientation. The diagnosis is the beginning of the correction. Second, engage the conventional fully from the understanding of the ultimate. This is the most practically demanding and most practically useful implication of the two truths. The person who understands emptiness engages the conventional differently, not less, but differently. They act fully, with genuine care for the relationships and the outcomes and the texture of ordinary life. And they act without the desperate clinging that comes from taking the conventional to be the ultimate level of what is real. Find one relationship or situation in your current life that you're either clinging to, holding too tightly, organizing your well-being around in a way that makes you brittle, or dismissing, treating as less real or less important than it is because you have taken the insight into impermanence as a permission to disengage. And bring both truths to it. It is conventionally real and matters. It is ultimately empty of inherent existence, and therefore does not need to be held as if it were permanent. Third, use the conventional to access the ultimate. Nāgārjuna's point that the ultimate can only be taught through the conventional is not only a point about Buddhist pedagogy. It is a description of how the contemplative practice actually works. The meditation practice is a conventional activity, sitting, breathing, paying attention, through which the ultimate becomes visible. The philosophical text is a conventional object, words on a page, through which the understanding of emptiness is transmitted. The relationship with the teacher is a conventional relationship through which the ultimate teaching is communicated. Find one conventional practice, meditation, philosophical reading, honest conversation, time in a natural world, that has historically given you access to the deeper level of how things are. Engage it today, not as a technique for producing a result, but as the Nāgārjuna prescribed vehicle, the conventional form through which the ultimate becomes available. Fourth, hold attention rather than resolving it. The two truths are not a contradiction to be resolved. They are attention to be held. The person who has genuinely integrated both lives in a specific quality of relationship with the world, fully present to the conventional in all its specific, demanding, irreplaceable reality, and simultaneously free from the clinging that arises when the conventional is mistaken for the ultimate. This is not a state to be achieved and then maintained. It is a practice, the continuous, available, daily practice of holding both. This matters, and this is empty of inherent existence. The relationship is real, and the self in the relationship is not the fixed entity it feels like. The work matters, and its outcomes are not as fully under the control of the separate self as the planning assumes. Hold both, today, in one situation that is currently demanding your full attention. Both truths, at the same time. I want to close with the image that the Madhyamaka returns to at its most compressed and most precise. Nāgārjuna writes, "Whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. The middle way is not a compromise between two positions. It is the accurate description of how things actually are, dependently arising, conventionally real, ultimately empty of inherent existence. The table arises dependently. It is real. The table is empty of inherent existence. It is not a fixed, independent thing. Both of these are true simultaneously. Together, they constitute the middle. Neither alone is sufficient. Neither alone is the teaching. You are dependently arisen. You are conventionally real. You are ultimately empty of inherent existence. All three of these are true. You do not have to choose between them. You have to live from all of them at once, present to the conventional, free in the ultimate, and stable in the middle way that holds both without collapsing into either. This is the most difficult and the most liberating philosophical position available. Nāgārjuna spent his life demonstrating it. He offers it not as a comfort, but as an invitation to stop choosing between the two truths that are both true and to discover what the life looks like that is spacious enough to hold both. Here is the question Nāgārjuna leaves us with today. In the situation that is currently demanding the most of you, where are you holding too tightly to the conventional, treating it as more solid and more permanent than the ultimate truth reveals? And where are you using the insight into emptiness to disengage from what the conventional genuinely requires? What would it mean to bring both truths fully to this situation? To act with genuine care and genuine presence, and to act without the desperate clinging that comes from forgetting that the self doing the acting is not the fixed, separate entity it feels like? Leave that in the comments. Because naming where the two truths are in tension in your current life is the beginning of the Madhyamaka practice. The middle way, both truths held together in the situation that is actually here. I'll see you in the next one.